golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer and summer.
Good problem to have, right? We got too much to talk about.
Too much to talk about.
I'm sure.
Well, today, for holy shit, 2.5 hours of pre-show, everyone. For those of you who are curious, until we arrived at this.
This might feel like a little bit more of a meta episode. One thing we're conflicted about is we have kind of been talking about the podcast as the thing for the last couple of, and part of that I think is it's winter.
Yeah.
We're not out we're not creating
as much
work as much. We're doing more we're not as in the world like, I went out, I'm working on this right now just actively. And I think part of that's just the seasonality of work. But because of that, like the podcast has kind of become a primary driver of conversation between us for the last couple of weeks. And we've seen a pattern. So we've a lot to talk about, but essentially where it starts is we put out a clip a couple of weeks ago at this point, a couple of weeks ago. And it really took off. It was the most successful clip on the channel so far.
Right.
And it was talking about this really general idea. And obviously, like, we titled it in terms of, like, it was Rick Rubin's idea of the work as a diary.
Right.
And,
the Rick Rubin approach.
Like, that's, it's not, there's other people who've had that.
Yes.
That concept, whatever. But obviously, we titled it that was a strategic thing.
Yeah. Especially because I've seen Rick Rubin clips from other interviews from the past, like on social media, where he's talking about your work as a diary.
Let's talk through that to start then, the strategy aspect behind it.
Yeah.
You knew how relevant it was. Then I brought it up.
Yep. It's
you were like,
what we keep referring to, not that it's not our own term or anything, but we keep using just zeitgeist, like not challenging ourselves, like what's in the zeitgeist, but I'm definitely consuming media in sort of my focused areas that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Consuming that media within those genres, within that type of videos, going like, what's the conversation? What are people talking about? Who are the people that are seemingly more present than other people? And Rick Rubin has been there a lot. And
maybe that's a lot of that probably has to do with algorithm.
And searches, putting the book, putting links in my stuff, and so we're getting served this stuff up.
We're pinged on
we check the boxes.
But it is interesting. I think we just kind of follow what's interesting to us, and we talked about that. But then the video clip took off.
And just to make a point,
taking off. Like
so when we do the podcast, Alex puts together the main edit, right? And he gives it to me, and I upload it to the YouTube channel. And we're specifically talking about this clip on the YouTube channel. Obviously, we're not doing these clips as just an audio only. So,
and bear with us. This is gonna. We're getting to an actual point. Yeah.
Yep. So then from the full episode, I harvest out the clips that I think that I like, or I think are interesting, or whatever. Like I don't pull like a chapter from the video as we have the chapters marked out. I pull a 2 to 7 minute clip. There's no time constraint, but I just try to find something in that area. And so I consciously was like, I'm going to put a clip out there that starts when we started talking about this Rick Rubin idea of a diary entry, to see how it does in comparison to a clip that's more about a concept. Like the most recent clip from that set was, I think, titled Does Pride Plus Expectations Equal Self-Sabotage? So something a bit more cerebral.
There was a different title from that, I think, when it was first.
I think the first clip in that series of 3, that's the last one. The first clip, I think, had a different title, and I may have changed it. Anyway, the Rick Rubin clip, just to catch up to where you were before I cut off, it ripped, and it's up to like 300 views, which for a channel like ours, that's a lot.
I think
we
had 50 subscribers when it went up.
I think it was more
Or
60, high 60s.
Yeah, 60.
Yeah.
It was 63, I think.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyways,
Yep.
there was a significant return
Right.
from that clip
Yeah.
compared to the baseline.
Yep. So a lot of views. We gained 8 to 10 subscribers, whatever that was.
And so we've had several conversations since then so YouTube is a game. You can there's like a gamification aspect to it. And if you really lean into it, you can pretty much, I don't want to say guarantee, but you can almost guarantee a certain result.
Right.
And so we wrote down recipes, formulas, playbooks, and blueprints. And we've talked about this concept before, but what's interesting to us is that gamification aspect exists. Those buttons exist, and we can push them. And we've tried to be very conscious of not pushing them.
Right.
Almost anti whatever that is. And in a way, that is our shtick. Mm-hmm. But it's not a shtick. Like a shtick is like, that's just how that stuff frustrates us.
Yep.
And we're like, we don't want to feed into that more.
Yep.
It's kind of just like, put your money where your mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
But then we put a clip up, and one of the tenets of this show, and if you've been listening to for a while, you probably know this, is we try to remain pretty evergreen. Mm-hmm. Like we're trying not to talk about people who are like maybe more in the cultural focus, celebrity kind of thing. And it happens, obviously, but we try to kind of navigate around that and just talk about these,
the underlying truth, concept,
framework,
human experience, whatever, framework.
And one of the conflicts that we had was, there's been a couple of clips where we've kind of leaned into it and they rip.
And the other one was a clip about Scorsese.
Yeah.
And
that was our
first one that kind of really took off. A couple of the early episodes have quite a few views by comparison to some later ones, but
there's definitely a couple of topical things, but for the most part, the topical things are, that's our core viewership.
Yeah.
And then each episode does, it's a pretty predictable amount of views.
Yeah.
You can almost get within 5 or 10 of what it's going to be each week.
Right.
But yeah, so the conflict arises in wanting to push back against that, but then understanding that that's there and how much of that do we lean into. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain aspect of enjoyment that comes from leaning into that I think Matt and I both get. Yep. So we wanted to spend the episode, and that's what we spent most of the pre-show is trying to wrap our heads around this idea of because
we came in here with like notes and ideas. I had some ideas, you had stuff in your head, and we spent 2.5 hours volleying these things back and forth until it arrived.
Is there anything worth talking about here?
Yeah. Like, what is this? Like, what is this about? And it came to this.
So this is, I guess the way we presented it to ourselves is this is almost maybe a companion episode, but also the vibe that we've presented so far is art, truth, good, commercialism, bad.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to kind of push back on our own thinking there, and then just also see what are the aspects of commercialism that are worth leaning into, or
given our
can these things coexist?
Yeah, and given our values, what's the best way to do it if and when it happens?
Yeah, is there a way to do it? Is it
what way? Yeah, and what and maybe not specific examples, but is there commercial stuff that's out there in the world that we're experiencing, consuming, being presented, where we have a positive reaction to it? We're like, well, if I did something commercial, I want it to be like that. Yeah. Because that fit, that was truthful or whatever.
Yeah. So, let's get in. Let's start with, so the clip took off. There was strategy behind that. you
there was sort of premeditation, yeah.
Of we're gonna this is
yeah.
We're gonna use.
It wasn't
the tags,
just this
we're gonna use
wholesome
the,
like, oh, this Rick Rubin clip is good. Let's put this up. Like I definitely was trying to think, or I was thinking, I wonder if we put something up that specifically cites Rick Rubin.
And the whole point in clips
it will get more traction.
The whole point in us doing clips is traction based.
Yeah,
we're not just doing the clips. I mean, yes, it is nice to break it down into like bits of micro content so people can kind of catch it. But I think one thing we've noticed is there is a core viewership on the episodes. And for the most part, it seems like there are some people who just rather listen to the, it's thoughtful. We release an episode every 2 weeks. Each one's an hour. That's so like, you don't have to sit down and listen to the whole thing at one time. No. You can listen to a little bit. Maybe an episode's not for you. There will be another one in 2 weeks. It's consistency. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of factors that went into that. And it's also not thoughtful. It was also just like common sense of like, this is where we ended up.
Yeah.
But the whole idea behind clips in the first place is it's 3 opportunities every 2 week cycle.
Yeah.
To get the word out.
Right.
And so you came up with this, the hierarchy of intention was like
that was
the term.
My way to encapsulate how to have a starting point for understanding the way to do this that I like and the way to do this that I don't like.
So when somebody has a project mm-hmm. and it is, or maybe we break down ours and then they can kind of project whatever is working, other people are working on onto that. But what was our hierarchy of intention with this podcast? And I hate to use the meta example, but it's like, it is this, I think that's something interesting about the format is this is a piece of work that we can explore and kind of get in, like we're inside of it right now. You can wrench, like tweak this bolt, go over here, cut this out. It's
And I think too, as we get into this, this is applicable to all the things that we love and care about, whether it's a company mm-hmm. or a show or whatever
screenplay.
Yeah, stuff that's made because they're going to sell it, made because we're going to watch it or consume it or whatever. I think innately sometimes have a response when something's presented to you or you see something, watch something, use something, buy something, whatever, where you maybe innately, instinctively, a reflex reaction and you're not even aware of, could be on the subconscious level, where you kind of understand the vibe of that thing. And I think that that's connected to the people who made it, what their hierarchy of intention is. We talked about in an early episode, and we put a clip out about it, Patagonia. There's a reaction to Patagonia out there where I think the vibe is their first level of intention is to make awesome shit. And then secondary intentions, make money from making that awesome shit or whatever it is. And I think when we did this podcast, at least for me, it was objectively thinking about our conversations after we had them at a coffee shop, after a movie, sitting here in the studio, and saying, I would love to watch something or listen to something that's about this. I want more of this out there. I want, especially as there's so much more noise, the democratization of making this stuff, we can do it because of 3 little cameras and 2 microphones. I'm hearing a lot of noise, and this sounds like something that is a lighthouse, in the storm or whatever.
Which to some people, I'm sure this is noise.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, more artsy kids talking about stupid shit about their feelings. Great.
But for our particular set of interests, we were serving our own need. We were making a souffle because we wanted a souffle, to quote what you said earlier.
And so the hierarchy of attention, the first level of intention is, I like this. I want more of this stuff out there. So I bet there's more people like me. So let's make this into something that we can share with other people and create connections and also maybe push back against, which would maybe be a secondary intention, push back against the noise especially a lot of the noise that's coming from a place of commerciality first,
Yeah.
where I don't like their order of hierarchy of intention.
Absolutely.
And I want more stuff out there where the hierarchy of intention starts with make something meaningful, valuable, whatever, that's talking about everything that we're experiencing as artists, creatives, creators, whatever, in the world. So that was my first level of intention in that hierarchy, personally.
So let's take a step back to this idea of commercial, like, again, I wrote down recipes, formulas, playbooks, and blueprints. Mm-hmm. Let's dissect that just a little bit.
Okay.
Because my first, when we said that, it's easy for us. It's not black and white, mm-hmm. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Is anything?
Nothing is. It's easy for us to sit down and look at recipes, formulas, playbook, blueprint, bad. Mm-hmm. We're against that.
Right.
There's a reason recipes, formulas, playbooks, and blueprints exist.
Absolutely.
And you even, like, we started off today talking about some of the things that we've been reading recently or have read in our, over time, where we're interested in exploring and understanding recipes, mm-hmm. formulas, playbooks, and blueprints.
Yep.
Because it informs just what's happening. Like you can look at something. Why is that happening? Oh, it's because of this.
Yeah.
So give me what is our outlook, I guess. Like when you hear recipes, formulas, playbooks, and blueprint, and then I'm like, now, yes, let's push back against that, but maybe what are the good things that come from that? Like where do we draw that line?
Well, here's the thing. I think when you hatch something, when you're like, we're going to make something, like, right, you're going to start putting together ingredients. And ultimately those ingredients, if they work together, are going to form a recipe.
Right.
Now, we're not necessarily like reinventing the video or audio podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are ingredients
that
you have to have. You have to have cameras, you have to have microphones, etc. We also looked at what areas of friction are there in doing something like this as something that is, for me, a third channel in the sort of YouTube thing that I'm pursuing. And then also like a tertiary pursuit, because I have things that are higher up on the hierarchy. I have to make money, so my main channel is a thing. You have to make money, so your job is a thing.
Right.
All of that kind of stuff, right? And so we started coming up with what the ingredients could be to make as little impact on those things that we have to contend with as possible. And then we also understand that there's a little bit of a recipe or a playbook for the things that we like. Yeah. We like a little bit more lo-fi. We like a little bit more standard def. We like a little bit less polish. We like a little bit less perfectly high definition, well lit, polarized or not polar, pro misfill, all these stuff, right? And you start coming up with, well, we could use these cameras because it checks this box, but it also checks this box.
Yeah.
And then you start having this, then you start going, well, that stuff's kind of cool right now. Or, maybe if you're not like consciously going, standard def is like a trend right now. Let's embrace it.
Yeah.
To me, that's the
version. It's like you have a recipe of something that that sounds good. I kind of like this. I want this.
Yeah.
And then you look at the ingredients that you have.
Right.
The ingredients that you can access without a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
How much time do you have?
Yeah.
If you want to make cookies, you could, maybe cookies are a bad example, but if you want to make, fried rice, you can make the most, like you could spend you could spend a day probably making like a great, amazing fried rice.
Going to the store, getting all the right stuff for it.
Right. Exactly. Or you could just be like, what do I have? I've got some rice. I've got some frozen veggies. Yeah. And
leftover asparagus. Yeah, that works.
That'll go in here. Exactly. And I think that's kind of what we what we did. And I think that's probably the better approach because yes, the level of skill comes into it. Like, you know, if you're a better cook, you can whip up something that's a little bit more. And at first, if you don't know how to cook, then you have to use the recipe and kind of follow it. But it's learning where you can kind of deviate and where you can, you know, insert yourself. And with us, it was like setting. Like we chose this setting. We could have, Matt has a studio. We could have used that. Yeah. We
could have invested more money and rented
a space around. There's plenty of spaces around Omaha
that had better lighting or, you know, easier access.
We could have lit. Yeah. We could have had cameras like, oh, we're going to have a wide shot and we're going to have two, you know, we're going to use cameras that'll shoot in raw.
We're going to get $500 Shure SM7Bs with the arm. Cause that's like the playbook of video podcasts is to have that set up.
So we took the recipe though, and we looked at the ingredients we had.
Yeah.
And we looked at what are we trying to accomplish. And then, you know, we want to eat some good fried rice, and I want to bury that metaphor, but it's interesting.
Well, think about using the restaurant and sort of food analogy. You have, you know, a Michelin star, right? And typically those would go to the highest quality restaurants that are growing their own ingredients, and they're sourcing the strawberries from the Japanese guy that grows them, and they're $300 for like 3 strawberries. Because this guy has like figured out strawberries, and they're like, it's ecstasy to eat them. And that, you know, but then all of a sudden you start seeing as Michelin kind of grows and expands, they start bringing in places that are a little more soulful, a little more mom and pop, a little more divey. And what they recognize, and this is my interpretation, not what they've said, but they start recognizing that maybe it's not about you know, checking all these boxes of high-end, luxury, expensive, rare, all that. It's the magic of the person making it and what their intentionality is, what their hierarchy of intention is. A chef could go out and be like, what are the restaurants that have Michelin stars? I'm going to replicate everything that they do. I'm going to have the fancy space. I'm going to have the stoneware. I'm going to have the you know, knives and forks and like all these things. I'm going to put together all the ingredients to try to replicate this thing.
You're trying to buy it.
Yeah. But then they're missing the magic, right? And so I think without us being super conscious of this, there's a desire to be scrappier. There's a desire to be lower tech. Well, partially
on the hierarchy, we tried to start with what is the magic.
Yeah, exactly.
The magic
What's the magic?
The magic was the conversation,
which we experienced ourselves in talking to each other. I'm coming away from this with a little bit of magic, with a little bit of progress, with a little bit of better understanding. I referenced this in the pre-show. Like and I won't go down this rabbit hole, but like I consider myself a bit of a like a human experience cartographer, and my conversations with Alex have helped me map my own experiences, the experience that I see of others, the experience I see of all of us together. And after the other, coming away with that value, then I start going, I don't necessarily want to bring other people in when we sit down and talk, but I want to share these conversations with other people. And you're feeling the same way, and maybe we've got something here.
I think it really fits well with the quote that I read.
Yeah.
So in the pre-show, I read this quote from, there's a book of Hunter Thompson letters, and the book is, it's The Proud Highway. And the quote is talking about...
This is a letter that he wrote to a
personal letter. And we've talked about similar things with like why Winogrand takes photos or why anybody takes photos, you know, like, but he's talking about, now I've run out of things to say. There's obviously no sense in talking about this kind of thing. Or maybe there is at that. I find that by putting things in writing, I can understand them and see them a little more objectively. And I guess that's one of the real objectives of writing, to show things or life as they are, and thereby discover truth out of chaos.
That's right.
That's almost a perfect thesis for the whole point of our conversations. What that magic is, that kind of sums it up, is we're just trying to make truth out of chaos, see things a little more objectively. And when we sit down and have a conversation, and when you have a conversation with anybody over coffee, over drinks, whatever, that's the point, is to try to make some kind of structured truth out of chaos.
Right.
And yeah, we found value in that. And, you know, we thought, okay, we know about production. We know about some of the recipes. We know how to cook.
We know what ingredients to use.
And so we decided to, and yeah, maybe, you know, over time, who knows? Maybe in 2 years, we decide we want to flip cameras aren't the thing, or like whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But we knew we had to start with the magic.
Yeah.
And then we've kind of created this thing that there's like an aesthetic that's come from that, where we haven't tried to really copy anything. It's just like, what makes sense? Why does this make sense? So when we were talking, this idea came up of, there's a cyclist, and his name is Graham O'Brien. And
some people have pronounced my last name that way.
Mr.
O'Brien.
Matthew O'Brien. So Obree. And so I just want to show you, this is the bike, and we'll put this in the show notes.
Yeah.
So he designed this bike.
Yeah.
So he wanted to, so as you can see, like,
it's
funky.
It's not what you would traditionally expect.
So there's this thing, and there's this record in cycling. It's called the hour record.
Yeah.
And it's basically you go all out on a track for an hour. And it's the record is whatever the world record is. It's who can get the farthest in that amount of time.
Yeah.
It's as primitive as it gets.
Yep.
You have an hour, you have a bike. How far can you get? How many laps can you do?
Yep.
If you go an inch further than the person that did it before, you're the new
record holder.
And so I forget, it was like, when was it? So it was in the 90s, I guess. So he has broken the world hour record twice, and his record has been broken. But he grew up, and there's a great documentary on YouTube you can watch about him. Essentially, he was poor. He didn't have any money. And cycling was this world where you had to kind of, you know, have this pedigree to, you know, the equipment costs money.
Yeah.
At different times it has been whoever has the best equipment has the advantage.
Yep.
You know, there's always something to be said for like, oh, I'm physically more gifted. But when it gets down to it, you're riding bikes where, you know, well, there's a little bit less friction on the ground, and it's going to give you this, especially when you're going for something like an hour record. Well, he built his bike out of a washing machine.
Wow.
Like, designed it in a basement. And he basically took the design of a bike and redesigned it to where, so like you can see the weird sitting position and everything. He looked at airflow, and this was before wind tunnel studies and things like that existed. And he was like, he basically looked at, I mean, that was happening, but not at like the level that it is now. And he looked at it and he goes like, I think it would be better to do that. And people clowned him for it.
Oh yeah.
And so broke the hour record twice. Yeah. And he was definitely physically gifted. Let's not, you know, he had the physical traits, but I mean, this is just him. Like, you have everybody telling you, no, it doesn't work. You can't do it that way.
Yep.
And he does it. And he breaks this world hour record twice, competing with guys who are on the top of the line equipment. Yep. Like, people literally pay. So he attempted it. They made like a replica version of his bike, but like a little bit better materials.
Sure.
And that's where he first attempted the record on, and he didn't break it. And then the next day he comes back, literally the same day, I think, like within, which an out, like if for those of you who aren't cycling, like that's like you're pushing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, a crazy amount of watts for an hour nonstop.
Yeah.
It's ridiculously taxing. Comes back on his bike, breaks it. And highly recommend watching it. But it reminds, like, you know, there was a recipe.
Yeah.
And he added his own flavor, and he broke that.
Yeah.
That record. And, you know, they tested this design too. And, you know, he was just going off of what he thought, kind of like a first principles approach of engineering on this bike, literally made out of the blade of a washing machine. And they tested it in a wind tunnel, like maybe 20 years later. And it was
Yeah.
highly
Well, and it makes
aerodynamic.
sense. Like the handle's closer, his head's down, so the air is for the
Yeah.
most part hitting his helmet first versus with your hands in front of you.
But he completely changed his form on the bike,
Right.
to match
to optimize it.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
And he's bumping up against conventional thinking, the
Conventional
status quo,
thinking,
the playbook as it's
it's
been
a
written.
folk story.
Yeah,
I mean,
and someone
it is.
comes in and disrupts it, right? The disruptor, and changes how we think, revolutionizes the.
It's interesting though, because it's not like anybody. It's not like all cyclists ride.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't happen. Like you've never seen it, right? He's the only guy. It's uniquely his,
and it might be unique for
worked.
that type of bike race, whereas the Tour de France.
But even
not
now, there's nobody's riding Aubry style bikes in the in the speed record.
And it could have been just
Yeah.
like that's what he needed to break
just
the
a
record,
flash and-
but it
yeah.
won't work for anybody else.
It's just a fascinating story that fits really well, I think, with, you've got recipes, formulas, playbooks, and blueprints, but that doesn't mean a thing. And then I think it's the interesting, like, John Henry aspect of the story, or like, they tried to redesign the bike.
Yeah.
We're going to make this, but it's going to be better because it's like, and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's the advertising agency coming in and trying to be like, oh man, look at how successful this was. We're going to copy it.
Yep.
That's the student film looking at a Tarantino thing and being like, oh wow, I really like this. I want to copy it.
And to me, that goes back to the hierarchy of intentions. Your intention, you are just you're copying something instead of taking your magic or your point of view or whatever it is, and starting from that.
Yeah.
And that to me has always been something I've battled against in my experience with screenwriting, especially, and even some approaches I've thought of for YouTube. Well, this person did this, it did well, I'm going to copy it. And sometimes I think one video I did where I basically did that and it got good results, 50 something thousand views. But I've always felt gross about it. Not like in a unethical way, but just sort of like, well, I just took what somebody else did and replicated it, photocopied it, versus starting from a place of my voice or what I want to share or how I want to share it and going there. Now, granted, you're always going to be pulling from influences, right? The stuff you've watched, the stuff you've listened to, the stuff you've read. I like how this person does this, but I would do it slightly different. And essentially, there's an element of that to this podcast, right? We think the form of our conversations existing as content is a video and audio podcast. And like just to bring it home, there's all these ways we could do it. But with all of the forces at play in our situation, this is the best way to do it. Yeah. I've actually told people about how we do this who maybe even haven't watched the podcast. And there's a level of, and this isn't us, patting ourselves in the back. There's sort of like, it's kind of smart and ingenious from a practical standpoint because these cameras are very little impact with data storage, which is a big thing with making a 3-camera video podcast
every week.
And then cost-wise, obviously, they're inexpensive, and they're easy to set up. They have a low footprint. We don't need to worry about lighting and dynamic range because it's like if it looks kind of meh, then so be it. So they, and then when you throw in the other ingredients, Premiere Pro with the I always forget the stupid name, the podcast editing thing, they start seeing like, wow, you guys kind of really unlocked the big obstacle to even thinking about taking on a video podcast.
Well, and we talked about that in the episode where, reducing friction.
Yeah.
I think you have to learn that though, of like, I have to find what I have to offer.
Yeah.
Look at the recipe and then adapt it to your circumstance and go watch that Aubry. And I'm going to send it to Matt too, because I don't know if he's seen it, but
I haven't, but I'll put it in my queue.
It's just inspiring in an interesting way.
Yeah.
So moving
which is a great idea for an app, by the way. If someone wants to work with me to invent an app that's like a queue, like all of the stuff Alex has sent me, I can like put it into an app that has it all. Like,
oh, there's apps for that, my friend.
and then like everything Cody sends me, everything my brother sends me, and then it's like I can go, oh yeah, what are all the things Mike has sent me? Click, then it takes me to YouTube and I watch it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some. If you guys know, like, somebody,
that'd be so great to just like have a place to compile all
somebody's
the links
like, WhatsApp.
And stuff.
No,
Anyway, side note, little sidetrack.
Well, that's actually a great transition.
Yeah,
because I was going to move into what are. So we talked about the recipes, formulas, playbooks, and blueprints, and then you talked about this concept in the pre-show, and I did as well. Of we like to read things to understand recipes, formulas, playbooks, and blueprints. Yeah. It's not like we obsess over it, but it is it piques our interest. It's interesting from a observational standpoint.
Yeah.
And we talked about some specific resources.
Yeah.
And so people listening, if they're like, okay, I mean, the first thing you have to do to be able to alter the recipe is to know the recipe.
Know the recipe.
You got to know how to use the oven. You got to know how to. Yeah.
You got to know the rules of screenwriting to break them. You got to know the rules of
So
of cooking.
I tend to think that is a good place to start.
Yeah.
Is learning the rules.
Right.
Or I mean, like you can just flat out break them, but like Aubry's bicycle is still a bicycle.
It's 2 wheels.
Yeah,
pedals. Like there are some things he couldn't not do.
Exactly. Like you could make something completely different.
Yeah.
But then he's not racing a bike anymore.
Right.
So you can push it right up to the end, but you got to know what the. So what I want to talk about first, your thinking and my thinking on why we consume those things. Why we enjoy, like.
Right.
I talked about reading a book that went through some of the top copy headlines.
Yeah.
Older book, but goes through some of the top copy headlines.
What are the words that bubble up in the headlines or the main line?
Yeah, and why
print
is
ad?
that? Exactly, of a print ad or
a tag for Nike, just do it, or
exactly.
And that's probably
that's more of like same kind of thing though, but and why are these resources useful?
Yeah.
And then maybe we'd spend just a couple of minutes talking about some specifics that have been influential in ours. And I mean, I almost want to look up at the books and be like, what?
Well, I'll tell you the perfect word that summarizes when someone's in violation of the hierarchy of intentions, the word clickbait. Clickbait came because people found out that if you titled something a certain way, it would get people to click.
Yeah.
And they started titling stuff to get the click, but then the video didn't actually deliver on the promise. And it was bullshit. It was a lie. It was the intention was to get the click, but then not deliver on the promise. And so people, this term clickbait came up. You baited me into clicking, and what you've delivered has nothing to do with the title. And there's a violation there. Absolutely. So
is the direction, and I don't want to like interrupt your thought, but is the direction you're going, then people started to, because I'm almost thinking of like a Casey Neistat, who then started to utilize the clickbait and deliver it on it in an unexpected way. So he's almost using the clickbait to inform the narrative. So he still gets the benefit of clickbait, but it's he's Aubry's bicycle.
Yeah, he's using it not only to deliver on the title, but to actually hopefully delight the viewer by delivering something where they go, I see it, Casey.
It's almost like the clickbait.
Gotcha. It's like a magic trick.
You draw somebody in with the clickbait, and they're looking to fulfill that expectation, and then you give them an even better fulfillment, or you might fulfill an expectation that they didn't even come in with that's better than the one in the clickbait.
Yep.
And then you've won at that point.
Yep. And if you can take them, and I can't think of a specific case, if you can take them to where they're like, I'm about to hit the stop button because you had a clickbait title and you're not delivering. Wait a second. Oh shit.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's sorcery right there. Okay.
That's understanding the rules.
And that's understanding the rules, the ingredients, but your hierarchy of intention is I am going to delight these people watching this by using this construct, this thing that's happening out there, people lying in their titles and then not delivering on it. I'm going to take that and get them this close to where they're going to jump out, and then
you're getting all the benefits
them.
of clickbait, of the reason that clickbait became a thing.
And then you're getting all the benefits of exceeding someone's expectations, delighting them, and then you get
Thoughtful
virality.
content.
And then you get, or virality, or just, word of mouth, whatever. It's like the twist ending of The Sixth Sense. You do something like that, and then that movie gets terrible reviews or mediocre reviews, nobody, whatever. And then all of a sudden it's, one of the top earning movies of all time. And I think back then it set a record for like one of the only movies that made $20 million a weekend, 5 weekends in a row or something. And again, subverting expectations, delight,
playing on human
stuff.
Psychology of, I know a secret you don't, I want to get in on this. Oh, like,
but then guess,
you know the secret, right? You know the twist. You're not going to tell your friend the twist. You're just going to say, there's a twist.
Yep.
It's crazy.
And even that to me is too much information, because the delight is, I didn't even know there was a twist coming. It happens, then you're blown away by it. Now, then what do you get afterwards? You get a bunch of people that go, we're making twist endings. And then they happen and you're like, yeah, I see it, but it just didn't have the right ingredients. It didn't have the right magic. So people came close. They kind of did
The Godfather and Saw.
Right. They kind of do it, whatever. And so that's, that kind of goes back to, again, what you're hoping to do. Now, we're not messing around with twist endings and clickbait and all that stuff, but, back to the Rick Rubin title, like, hey, we're talking about Rick Rubin here. We can put this title together and maybe earn a few more clicks or get, some more exposure as a result. But I, at the end of the day, feel like we're talking about something of value in this clip. So the hope is that people watch it. The Rick Rubin thing is a gateway, and then their expectations are exceeded. Well, these guys have interesting stuff to say. What else are they doing? Oh yeah. Subscribe, watch more content, whatever, and we continue to connect with more people. So again, hierarchy of intentions. First level intention: make good shit, magic.
I like
stuff.
This.
I like this, and then using other intentions to try to expand our reach, grow our connections, deliver value to more people, whatever. Hopefully that circled back a little bit to where it started. I can't remember where we started.
Getting, like, the whole thing was resources, I guess.
Yeah.
So, I mean, clickbait, one example for sure. Understanding, I think it's also just understanding that there's an underlying dynamic to just about anything. Yeah. And you can... I think one thing we enjoy doing is kind of going away from that and just, free associative, kind of putting things together. Here's an idea. Let's play with it. Okay, put it back. But understanding there are underlying dynamics. Like, Casey might have not been, I almost guarantee you that he wasn't going into making videos of, like, how can I clickbait title this?
Yeah.
Where's the hole in the market? I'm going to clickbait, build for that. And then, no, you're just making it. But then he was, like, skillful at identifying.
Yeah. Or he could have been like, I don't know what the title of the video is. I'm going to tell this story. And then when he was thinking about titles or whatever, he was like, oh, if I title it this way, it's kind of clickbaity. But then if I change this in the edit, it could, like, oh. And then he's like, oh. Yeah. It's not like he had, you just have it all figured out from the top. Just a kind of another meta thing. Like, after we got done with talking about clickbait, and when you started taking things back, my brain went to, I'm going to remember to pull the clip about clickbait and twist endings, because that topic, clickbait and twist endings, whatever the title is, I'm already thinking of the title of the clip. Yeah. I'm going on a secondary level of intention on the hierarchy. I'm going, that's interesting to me. Yeah. So if I saw a clip that was titled something like clickbait and twist endings, don't lie in your videos, or whatever the title would end up being, that to me is elevated above some of the other things that we might pull as a clip.
Or do you even, like, go a step further and just title it something entirely clickbaity?
As long as it's like, as long as there's not a betrayal.
Like, but I think addressing,
unless it was like
the addressing the betrayal,
it's kind of meta,
which is a little too on the nose, right? But you gotta be careful. There's definitely, I think that's part of the fun is experimenting with some of that stuff, and we've got such a low stakes environment here that it's fun. We can experiment with it.
But here's the other thing too. When I think about that in that clip, clickbait and twist endings, right? One of the first things I'm thinking about is, how can I use this clip that has value to me as someone who would stumble across it objectively? I'm looking at it from the objective point of view, like Hunter S. Thompson, right? How does putting that clip out there connect us with more people versus how does it get me more views? Views to me is a byproduct of connecting with more people, or more people sharing that clip, or more people, whatever.
I think connecting with more people, I think just break that down even a little bit. Views is a byproduct of emotional connection, period.
Right.
Like money is a byproduct of emotional connection. Anything in the world that is some kind of metric is a byproduct of some sort of connection. Whether that's fulfilling a desire, whether that's, fulfilling a need, there's a human element to it at all times.
And I think, unfortunately, a lot of us, there's like this surface level communication of success or know-how or aptitude. Aptitude, is that the right word? With doing this, mastery. Because someone hears your video got 1 million views. Like 1 million views or 100,000 subscribers, a lot of people don't go to that next level, even subconsciously, of look at all the connections you've made. Look at how many people have enjoyed your stuff. It's just, it's box office. It's this thing that doesn't make a lot of us think at what that really means.
Yeah.
Well, what does that really represent? It stays for a lot of people at this level. And then I think we sometimes, as makers of things, creators, communicate to others, that video got 100,000 views. And we're only thinking of it as that metric that communicates the value or validity of what I'm doing, where the real thing that matters for the people whose hierarchy of intentions is a little bit more aligned with what my values are, is look at all the people I've connected with, and to share these ideas and to have a community or to have a book club, whatever, that aspect of it. So I think, just to wrap up that point, we got on the phone, the video is ripping, as we call it, and
Rip Rubin.
But I felt like there's a subtext there, an extra layer when we're talking about it. We're not like, whoa, this is going to mean sponsors. Like we're going to get monetized soon.
That
all this stuff.
Like,
it's like
that never came. That never came into the conversation.
There's just a default feeling of, this resonated with people, and it wasn't bullshit. It wasn't like, well, they care about Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an element of that, but then I think I watched the view duration. The view duration was well over 2 minutes, average view duration, and that tells me, again, look, like, if you have view duration 2 minutes, like, who cares? Well, that means to me that they were going, oh yeah, because we only talked about the Rick Rubin point for like the first minute.
Yeah.
And then it kind of went into other stuff related to it.
And for us, like, the idea was using work as a diary. The idea had nothing.
Right.
I mean, Rick Rubin happened to be the vehicle that hit us at that time.
Yeah.
Like we both heard it and talked about it, but the idea was something that resonated with us on an emotional level.
And hopefully for viewers, they saw, I'm clicking because of Rick Rubin, or I know about the diary thing. I want to hear what these guys think about it, or I have no clue what this diary thing is, but that's interesting. I've never thought of it that way.
I want to circle back to what you just, about how our conversation and like just how, like, identifying. I guess the question would be, is it worth auditing this stuff? And I want to talk about the Bible versus the National Enquirer thing. I want to work that in, but we did kind of talk about resources. Yeah. So maybe just let's spend 3 minutes on resources, and then we'll move to that Bible versus National Enquirer intentions, and like maybe we finish out on that point.
And can I just say, I just want to say one thing. This is not going to take us anywhere. Some people listening or watching might be going, God, they're just talking about their podcast. Like this is just like an episode about this hierarchy of intentions and all this stuff. My intention in talking about this is how can we use what we're doing and how we're feeling about it, our reaction, our thoughts, the values behind it, the intention behind it.
Yeah.
And if you're making something, the viewer is making something, painting, photographs, a YouTube channel, whatever it is, like just trying to correspond what we're doing to what they're doing.
This is
not
totally
us
just the Rick Rubin. This is the vehicle of the idea. Like the podcast is just a useful metaphor.
Right. For how we want to be thinking about what our thinking is in making stuff.
Yeah.
What our guidelines are, and not necessarily like we went in knowing them.
Yeah.
We're exploring them and discovering them as we go. But then there are also things that, we knew and know going into it.
Well, having something low stakes where we can review so immediately and directly the inner workings and mechanics of.
Right.
That is such a creative act.
Yeah.
And that's so like, you don't see the byproducts of putting out, you work on like a lot of the stuff screenplays or, photo projects. It is more long-term.
Sure.
And so it's so helpful for us, I think, just like this is a testing ground, this podcast. It's a metaphor for what we're trying. It's just a useful metaphor.
In this video specifically, being a mechanism to get us into this conversation about these opposing forces, these two camps, if you will, not to make it too binary, but a general part of the population making things with a different hierarchy of intentions, and us making it with our set of hierarchy of intentions.
And we did talk about this at the beginning, and I promise we're going to get into it. But no, it is this idea of we just kept, we talked about, we really don't think commercial stuff bad. Yeah. And then you just sit with that, and it started to feel dishonest between the both, because we're so plugged into all of that. Like we're so interested in like, oh, well, what if you change this word? And what if you, the little mechanics,
tags, the thumbnail,
because that is part of the, it's
a puzzle to solve.
Yeah. It's part of the craft of it. Yeah. It's part of the craft.
Right.
And, the artistic side is fun, but we also do enjoy the craft side, and we stress the craft side.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the interest comes from, is like there is a craft to commercial viability in a sense. Yeah. And so like part of
and what is commercial viability? Connecting with more people, right?
Right.
Like resonating with more people.
Exactly. And in a not a superficial way,
right? And not or manipulative way or an exploitative way.
That's our definition. Other people have different definitions, I'm sure.
And this goes back to National Enquirer and the Bible.
Yeah, and so before we get to National Enquirer and the Bible and talking about kind of,
I'm just like, Alex is like, Matt, quit grabbing the wheel.
No. We're flowing. I just, like getting on, delivering on promises, we're like, we're going to talk about some resources. I just don't want to leave that.
Yeah, we got to stop and get gas first. We're going to run out.
Yeah, we're almost out of gas.
We're going to miss our exit.
I mean, what are some useful resources that you found in exploring the craft side of commercial viability? Like you can talk about specific books, maybe, there's some books that come to mind on my end. Some of them are, a lot of them are just more general. Like there's a great advertising book I read a couple of years ago called "Hey Whipple, Squeeze This." It's about like the toilet paper ad. Yeah. But it's so it.
That's going to be one of your thumbnails, by the way. Just squeezing the toilet paper,
squeezing the TP. That book was extremely helpful to me in understanding like how to craft a headline, how to craft, good copy and not in the sense of like, if you do this, you're gonna, but just in understanding the underlying mechanics. So there's another one, Breakthrough Advertising, where it talks about like the dynamics of copy. And we talked about some of Robert Greene's books, 48 Laws of Power, Mastery, just understanding the underlying dynamics of power relationships and political structures and
psychology resources.
I'm doing more of like the pop. Like the pop.
Well,
but just
and that's like
study philosophy,
philosophy,
study
psychology, I've read a few advertising books, especially not only just in the copywriting itself, like how to write a good headline, and then the supporting material, even though print ads don't really do a lot. I mean, the older print ads that I studied, have like a lot of copy underneath the headline and the photo.
But that's the same thing though. Yeah. Body copy is the video. Right. The headline
That's exactly right.
Like we're the dynamics of they haven't changed.
There's
and the image is the thumbnail. Like 100%. We're still working on the same.
And that's what I've studied as well. I've studied old print ads, movie posters, different thumbnails essentially that bring people in, and understanding the hierarchy of that. Where's your eye go first, and then where does it go? I mean, there's even that. Like how does human biology with the eye make you look at certain things before you look at something else? The brightest object in the frame, what colors? People studied color theory and complementary colors and how we respond to that. I've looked at typography and how do you combine different fonts, serif and sans serif, and what fonts do I like versus what fonts read well to the human eye on a thumbnail or whatever. Obviously, YouTube thumbnails, or YouTube video titles are a science as well, but those all harken back to headlines in a newspaper, print ads, things like that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of exploration of craft. And then the other is in just consuming media, whether it's a newspaper article, in a paper, or in an app, or other videos, you start to understand what I like and don't like. And then what does that do? Yeah. It makes you go, well, I'm trying to look for the thing that I like, but I don't see it. So I'm going to make it. And I think that applies to my Final Cut Pro tutorials, which part of the motivation was people aren't really making their tutorials like this. And again, it wasn't like reinventing the form or disrupting everything. It was just sort of like, I really want to teach why you do something, not how you do it.
Absolutely. Understanding the underlying principles and stuff. And some books that come to mind, I mean, you talked about color. There's Joseph Alber's Interaction of Color. I love that book.
Yep.
I keep it on the little shelf here.
Yeah.
Rework was something that was good to me. There's one called The Brand Gap, and I think it's Marty, I forget what his name is, but just look up, he has other series of books. He has some books on ideas and stuff that are super interesting. These are kind of advertising specific, but just underlying. No logo. There's Alex White is a designer. You have one of the books. I have two elements of graphic design and listening to type. He has a bunch of great work on just understanding how, because you do want to understand why these things work.
Right.
I mean, and there's, we were talking about the Chomsky documentary, Manufacturing Consent, understanding, PR. You've got propaganda. Right. The book is titled Propaganda. Yeah. You've got some of the great. There's tons of understanding how media is presented. Yeah. Why it's presented. Why it's presented in this way as opposed to this way. That's important if you're going to be operating in the space. Again, it's like understanding. Okay, I still got to make a bike, and then you can really start to manipulate the pieces and make the bike that you want to make. Yeah. Does anything specific come to mind in terms of books that you, again, I mentioned breakthrough advertising.
Yeah. I mean, so
we'll try to include, the show notes might include like some post.
Right, that we didn't mention here. There's an advertising book that I read, and I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me. But I mean, I just devoured it in like 2 sittings. I think a lot of mine.
There's great books on just writing too, just like sentence structure and just the principles of writing. Yeah.
I've also just like watched, read, listened to a ton of interviews from filmmakers about like what they learned from making the movie or the release of the movie, whether it was a triumph or a failure, the stuff that they never would have guessed would have connected. There was no knowledge that this ingredient was going to be part of the alchemy that led to, it being a box office smash, others who did. So, you just take all of that information collectively and, you apply it to what you're doing. Sometimes I think in the translation, though, like taking what I learned from advertising, taking what I've learned from, newspapers and just journalism, taking what I've learned from film and cinema. Sometimes things like get lost in the translation to a different form, whether it's a book or a YouTube video, and like you kind of do something that you think those ingredients can adapt to that form, and it doesn't quite work. Yeah. And you have to do some, kind of an autopsy to kind of understand why.
I do think most things, though, they string together.
Yeah.
Like,
there's tons of
There's
overlap.
not really any field in the world. Like, if you understand human psychology well,
yeah,
that's going to apply to any field.
Yeah.
You just have to understand how to apply it to the specific properties of that.
Yeah. And again, hopefully, in doing that, the hierarchy of intentions is that it's coming from, I don't know, a more truthful, selfless.
And it sounds so like,
I just don't want it to be, human psychology says that if we incorporate a charity onto our podcast, people are going to develop sympathy for us because we have a charity that they blah, 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 and they know that we're helping it. And then that's going to get people to subscribe.
Here's the other thing that like these principles aren't the most complex.
Yeah.
And a lot of like, if you see people packaging them and selling them to you, those people they're trying to take advantage of your underlying psychology. They're trying to like, come to our seminar and learn how to get millions of views on YouTube or da-da-da. It's the same bullshit as the come to our real estate, make $1 million seminar. And so it sounds like, I'm just interested in creating art. I don't need to know any of these things.
Right.
I would push back against that because these are, first of all, to be an objective observer, you have to understand when it's possible to get pulled into a subjective battle or an art. It's just, I mean, like you're talking about propaganda, the Edward Bernays book, or like just these ideas that were, I mean, these are ideas that go back as far as human history. Mm-hmm. Psychological manipulation, like figuring out how to, they are designed at their core, and they're not all effective. There's no like, dark and smoky da-da-da, like, but they are designed, and when they are effective, they're extremely effective to get an emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And to be an objective observer, you have to at least understand when that is present, so you can step back and be like, this is how I could react emotionally. It is the artist's job to be an objective observer.
Yeah.
Or at least that is one of the components of creating art, in my opinion.
And I think part of that is...
And understanding this stuff helps with that.
And I think part of that is, the artist isn't necessarily going, I know if I do this, that a large group of people are going to have this reaction. I feel like a lot of it for the artist is, I'm going to try that and see how I feel. And I don't have a clinical understanding of psychology that I'm then deploying and going, well, I see what happened here. I did this thing, and then in my brain, this chemical went from here to here and then did this, and then this happened. They're just using themselves as a testing ground for, how does this feel? Do I like that? I don't know, there's something interesting there. Now, maybe they might enhance it. Maybe they end up scrapping it. Maybe they go farther with it and it doesn't quite work. But they're listening to their own reaction to it and feeling their reaction to it to go, how does that feel? I was just listening to the Trent Reznor Tetragrammaton with Rick Rubin, and he went off and did something, and he said it gave me...
This is like the Scorsese meme at this point.
It gave me goosebumps. And I'm like, but somebody was telling him in the recording studio, no, don't do that, whatever the pushback was. But he knew.
Whenever I get goosebumps, I take a note.
Yeah.
on anything. If I'm looking at, if I'm photo, film, whatever, I try to identify why. Yeah. And look, I am the last person that would push for like having such a granular and robotic, but it is extraordinarily helpful to understand, because then that's the craft aspect of it.
Yeah.
The emotion is the art. Like,
Right.
That is, but the craft you have to serve the craft
Right.
as well.
And I think for me that the example with the artist sort of taking stock in how they react, to me, they're crafting it based on from listening, whereas some people, I think, with a different set of hierarchy of intentions, are observing so they can manipulate.
Yeah.
And could both get the same physiological response in someone, the dopamine release, the goosebumps, whatever? Possibly.
Yeah.
I just like the idea of it coming from that more artistic, magical, like this was a magical thing, not I know if I put these ingredients in this hamburger patty, people are going to do it, and then they're going to buy more and buy more and buy more.
We live in a world where you can do it any way you want, and it's certainly more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And the eventual product is much more satisfactory if you do that.
Right.
It is, I mean, that's kind of what's uniquely human about,
right?
Like all of us have, it's just a more interesting, and I think that's the way that you get to stuff that's truly unique.
Yeah.
Is you kind of follow that. Oh, got goosebumps.
Right.
Let's go down. Let's visit.
Welled up. All that stuff.
So I was going to get into the whole Bible National Enquirer thing, but maybe we just leave that on the table. Nobody knows what that even means. We didn't describe it. It was just.
I think it goes to what I just said, though. And so without getting into it, it's to me, it's
this point. This would have been a better point on. Just what we were talking about a little earlier, but I read this interesting thing yesterday, and I just took note of it because it was interesting, and it was like, this was from the 80s, and it was talking about humans and how we all say that, we have this high ideal of ourselves. It's like, you ask a class, a lecture room full of college students, maybe, you go to a class of writing, or I don't know, like, do you like theater or movies more? Or it's like, do you read more theater or do you watch more theater or film?
Right.
And it's like, they're going to say theater.
Right.
It's like know.
That projects a more favorable self-image.
Exactly. But then you ask for, like, okay, raise your hands if you've seen a play in the last week.
Right.
Probably nobody.
Yeah.
Raise your hands if you've seen a movie.
Right.
Yeah. And same goes for the Bible National Enquirer. It's like,
right.
You ask, this was the example, it was 1980 something. And it was like, you asked 20 people if they read the National Enquirer. Almost all of them will certainly say, no, I don't read that garbage. Yet, the National Enquirer is the most popular magazine in the world. You ask 20 people what book they do read, they'll probably, this 1980 was a different time. It was definitely more, religion was more at a forefront. But I think this would remain true today in a lot of aspects. What book do you read? The Bible.
Yeah.
Probably 19 out of 20 of them, the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it's like, now, how many people have actually read the Bible?
Right.
More people read the National Enquirer in a week than have read the Bible in the last, 2,000 years.
Yep.
And I think that's just an interesting look. And the reason that I brought that up in terms of this conversation was we were talking about how, we're doing this, and in our mind, there's this justified reason.
Yeah.
Of okay, we're making this podcast because And I do think that, but I also I raised this question to Matt in the pre-show. I'm like, are we just reading the National Enquirer and saying we read the Bible?
Yeah. Are we doing what is expected of us or what we want? Are we portraying ourselves how we want to be perceived or who we actually are?
And I like to think it's the latter.
I like to think that it's gray.
Yeah.
It's always going to vacillate.
There's always both sides of it.
You're always in certain situations. I mean, there's part of me sometimes that goes, you know, you've got a Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, and Jurassic Park poster in your studio. If you want to be a serious artist wouldn't have this pop culture drivel on their walls. They would have sophisticated books and all this stuff, you know, like you start like thinking like, but this is what I like. This is, you know,
and I think
that, to me,
I think though there's room for both. You know, there's room for both.
But those pressures that you get from how I'm perceived versus who I really am, and that, I mean, this is all what this stuff comes down to: the hierarchy of intentions,
and tear the hierarchy down. Whatever. I think the thing though, like we're always just trying to be as honest as we can.
Yeah.
Like if as much as we lie to the audience is the same as like if we're lying to them, it's because we're lying to ourselves.
Sure.
And I'm sure we're lying to ourselves in aspects at all times.
Absolutely.
I'm sure we're lying to each other in conversation at all times.
Well, you said it too when we did pre-show. The minute you were aware that we were recording, it changed.
Yeah.
It changed. Something changed.
The tone of the conversation, the willingness to just free float and just work from a complete
And it wasn't like you were lying. It was just
lack of expectation.
I think we were both like falling into show-like structures of conversation versus conversation structures of conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It didn't mean that it was not truthful. It was different.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we were also aware of it, and that awareness was affecting how we pre-show.
I think that's constantly what, I mean, most people are like this. It's you say something or do something, then that allows you to be objective about it.
Yeah.
And then you gain a new level of awareness.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to constantly refine that based on the new level of awareness, it's not like you're going to get anywhere. There's no point, but you can definitely get a broader understanding of how things work. And I think also it can lead to a more optimistic day to day because you see that a lot of stuff is just people trying to manipulate other people.
Yep.
And that things aren't that different than they've always been. You know, we're just dealing with different mediums and different characters, but you know, the plot is still the 3-act structure. There's just a new twist on it. And I think when you kind of start to see that and see those underlying dynamics at play, and you can get there by reading and by looking into, and look, I'm not saying that we understand these things. We never will.
No.
And all we can do is strive to understand a little bit more. But it does offer a bit of peace, maybe, about the whole thing.
And I think that factors into the turmoil one can get who is trying to create meaningful work, but isn't sure how to integrate the commercial component. And I think understanding that we're going to touch on both areas. We're going to have a moment where I consciously choose a clip that's about Rick Rubin because I'm hoping it's going to connect with more people because it's searched for, it's in the zeitgeist.
I love the feeling of checking and we've got 5 more subscribers than we had the day before. I want to see that more.
And I think anybody who's making something and struggling with those motivations, I think for me, what works is if I go back to the hierarchy of intentions, if I go, I know I did not put that clip out there because I'm trying to get monetized as quickly as possible. And that's my like main thing. Or I didn't put that clip of something that's kind of potential sponsor related to kind of butter them up for the pitch that I'm crafting right now, so that when we hit 1,000 subscribers, we can start packaging this thing and getting it out there and making money. You know, so when it comes to the commercial component of this, and when that eventually happens, if it does, I'm always going to pass it through that litmus test. Is this something that goes with our values and what our hierarchy of intentions are? And is this stuff already in my diary? You know, whether it's a product I already use and love, or it's something that I'm sent and I give it time and go, I do like this. Even though you got to watch out, because if there's like a carrot in front of you with that, who knows how that's going to inform whether or not you like. I like this enough. I mean, I like it enough. I mean, they're going to pay us some money. Yeah, I like it. Again, you got to run it through all your checks.
Yeah, and you're constantly being presented with new scenarios. Like
Yeah.
we could sit here and plan all day about, this is how we react to this.
Yep.
So we don't know until we're in the moment.
Right.
But yeah, I mean this feeling that I have right now after the last hour of talking is exactly why we do this.
Right.
It's the whole reason we decided to do this thing in the first place.
Yeah. And for very selfish reasons, coming in with some things that I'm working on or not understanding, or think I have a clear understanding, but I want to bounce it off of you. It's very selfish as well. In that, going back to that cartography example, you and your insight, your objectivity and what I'm talking about, or your perspective on it, is helping me better map those things.
I'm just going to reread this quote.
Yeah,
I mean, like, this is not, it's not a known Thompson quote or anything, and I don't even know if it's, but it's just, it really just, now I've run out of things to say. There's obviously no sense in talking about this kind of thing. Or maybe there is at that. I find that by putting things in writing, I can understand them and see them a little more objectively. And I guess that's one of the real objectives of writing, to show things or life as they are and thereby discover truth out of chaos.
And I use the cartography example because what is a map? It is an objective point of view of what something is, what land is, what the terrain is, so that you can see it objectively and make decisions based on it.
And I mean, he goes on.
Yeah.
And now that I think on it a while, I think that the very fact that I write this letter and that I feel a need to write it shows the value of putting words in order on a piece of paper.
That's right.
For words are merely tools, and if you use the right ones, you can actually put even your life in order if you don't lie to yourself and use the wrong words. So I butchered the reading of that. But no, for words are merely tools. And if you use the right ones, you can actually put even your life in order if you don't lie to yourself and use the wrong words.
Yep.
I mean, the fact that I read that last night, that's not, that's exactly
that's exactly it. Yeah. And again, that's the hierarchy of intentions, the magic in wanting to figure this stuff out, to talk about it, to work through it, to not know what it is, but to just be aware of it. All of that stuff. That's exactly what
I guess we should probably publish this letter in the notes, though. Seriously, though.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
just
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a clip out of this portion. Like, to me, not necessarily because, Hunter S. Thompson's being searched for. But to me, for me, I mean, I almost got, I got the good feelings in reading that, because I'm like, yeah. And then relating it back to, just what's behind why I want to have these conversations with people, and specifically you, with my wife, with my family, and why I like when people seek me out for conversation. It's such a great exploration of how complex this stuff is, and I like the idea,
and how simple it is at the same time.
I also like the duality of my tendencies for control. Like the negative side of trying to understand this is like, well, maybe I can control it. Maybe I can control these things. And on the other side, just listening, surrender and listening and being open, and okay, well, let's not label it. Let's not define it. Let's not grab a hold of it and hold on to it. Just be aware of it, know what it is, and, include it in the process. And I think that's exactly what this does. It's continuing to build that awareness, enhance listening, create surrender, build that map, so that there's the navigation is I don't know. I don't want it to be easier.
Yeah.
Because I do want it to be hard.
It's just easy. I mean, I think it does get down to, like, it's less emotionally turbulent.
Yeah.
Right? There's just less. It's more steady. There's more of a case for optimism.
And you're never going to eliminate the turbulence. It's
Never.
just maybe it's like taking this thing and just like having the best understanding you can have of it. Even though I don't know that you would put that in the past and kind of move past it, but never revisit it and enhance it, you know? And I don't, and maybe that's a whole conversation for another podcast.
We need to get out of here.
We're going way over. But like, what's the end game here? Like, and that's the other thing. Like, why are you even thinking about that? There is no end game. It's just time is a flat circle.
Well, no, we're absolutely. It's just completely transitory. We're gonna.
So let's not beat ourselves up when we want to put a clip out there that we know might do better than another clip.
Yeah.
Because we know what our values are. We know our hierarchy of attentions. And when commercial
and then when those values get completely corrupted, then what?
No. And when commercial stuff comes in, we, through this conversation, our mutual understanding, what our experiences, our failures, we know.
Well, and the great thing about building an audience is an audience can hold you accountable.
That too. Yeah.
I think that is one of the benefits because many a man and woman have come in with high-minded values.
Yeah.
And have given way to
been seduced into less high-minded values.
So, but anyways,
it had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.